We have with us today Teresa Mosqueda, who is running for King County Council District 8, Sofia Aragon, and Jake Jacobovich. He is representing, running for. Jake is representing the Vashon-Maury Community Council today as a moderator, and I am with the Vashon Chamber of Commerce. We have some folks here in the room, and then we also have some folks on Zoom. We will be recording this today, so we will have recordings available through the through the Vashon-Maury Community Council, the Chamber of Commerce, and also Voice of Vashon, I believe. So if you would like to share this later, we encourage you to do so. And if you'd like to refer back to this, we would love to get this out in the community and start some of these important discussions. The election itself, there'll be a primary in August. Our third candidate, Good Space Guy, was not responsive to emails and phone calls, and so has not joined us today. But because there are 3 candidates, there will be a primary in August, but the general election is in November. So yeah, this is the first of our community conversations. I'd like to go ahead and we will do a reading of... I'm going to go ahead and read an acknowledgement. Today is Juneteenth, and we want to acknowledge that. Today, we honor Juneteenth, which commemorates the emancipation of enslaved African Americans in the United States. That emancipation was handed down in 1865. The Vashon Island Chamber of Commerce stands in solidarity with the Black community and the descendants of all those impacted by the legacy of slavery. We recognize that the historic violence against and oppression of individuals and communities lives on today in structural, systemic, and individual harms. It is our individual and collective responsibility to address and alleviate these harms, and we stand in solidarity to effect change. And I will hand it over now to Jake Jacobovich, who will speak about the land that we are on.
Well, hi, thank you all for coming tonight. I'm on the Vashon-Maury Community Council. I used to be on it in our heyday back in the 90s and 20s and things like that, where we were a great powerhouse. And Diane Emerson and her people are reconstituting it, have reconstituted it, and we're building our strength again. Anyway, on tonight's land acknowledgement, most acknowledgements I hear is, recognizing that we're on the traditional lands of the Salish people and stuff like that. But in my work before I retired, I had a piece that was sort of poetry from a great Salish Chief Self, that took the beauty of their culture and stuff in these words. And so that's what I read here. Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth, and it is part of us. The perfumed flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle, these are our brothers. The rocky crest, the juices in the meadow, the body heat of the pony and man, all belong to the same family. The shining water that moves in the streams and rivers is not just water, but the blood of our ancestors. If we sell our land, you must remember that it is sacred. Each ghostly reflection in the clear waters of the lakes tells of events and memories in the life of my people. The water's murmur is the voice of my father's father. The rivers are our brothers. They quench our thirst. They carry our canoes and feed our children. So you must give to the rivers the kindness you would give to any brother. If we sell you our land, remember that the air is precious to us, that the air shares its spirit with all life that it supports. The wind that gave our grandfather his first breath also receives his last sigh. The wind also gives our children the spirit of life. So if we sell you our land, you must keep it apart and sacred as a place where man can go to taste the wind, that is sweetened by the meadow flowers. Will you teach your children what we have taught our children? That the earth is our mother? What befalls the earth befalls all the sons of the earth. This we know. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected, like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. From Chief Self. Thank you.
All right, so the agenda for tonight, the format, we're definitely having a forum, so we will start off with moderator questions, and then we'll have time for audience questions, and then we'll have some time for the candidates to ask questions of us. Before we start, I'd like to do some thank yous, specifically to the Presbyterian Church, where we are, for hosting. Thank you so much, Jack, and everyone who lent the space and did all the work to bring us here today. I'd like to thank also Diane Emerson, who is in the back, our president of our community council, for running all the tech today and online and bringing in our online community, and Debbie Jackson, who is also going to facilitate our question and answer piece with microphones. So thank you so much. And also we have Jessica Anakar here from the Community Council, and want to thank her as well for helping support all the back end work to make this possible. So tonight we will have the candidates introduce themselves. We'll do moderator questions, audience questions, and then questions back. So I'd like to start, we'll just do 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes each. That's a while to talk, but up to 5 minutes each for introductions. And Sofia, we will start with you, and then Teresa will go to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that acknowledgement for Juneteenth. It is an important day to recognize freedom and opportunity for all, for everyone. So my name is Sofia Aragon, and I'm the mayor of the city of Burien, and I'm running for King County Council District 8 because I want all of our county residents to thrive. And this means that King County is a safe, healthy, and inclusive place where families can call home for a lifetime and businesses can take root. So I actually grew up in South Seattle, and my mom single-handedly supported our family of 4. So with a union job, she had a living wage and great health care. And eventually, our parents moved us to unincorporated King County for affordable housing. That's where a safe neighborhood and good public schools, which is what they wanted for their 2 girls. And like Mom, I became a registered nurse, and one of the best jobs I ever had was working in a community clinic in the Rainier Valley. And I chose to serve people who spoke different languages. They were immigrants, low income, some struggled with mental health and substance use, and struggled with housing as well. And so it was nursing that taught me to be an advocate for others. And I decided to step up that skill and become an attorney to shape public policy. And so in Olympia, where I represented the Washington State Nurses Association, I advocated for workplace safety, healthcare for all, and getting toxics out of the environment. And so as mayor, I know that strong public policy creates opportunity, and I want to create those conditions where everyone has the chance to succeed. So as some examples as mayor, I know that representation matters. As a woman of color and Asian immigrant, I took a stand on anti-Asian hate. And some of you may have heard of the memorial for the family that was killed on the streets of Seattle, and I attended that to pay respects to the family. And I do support a co-response model so that mental health crisis is not treated like a crime. So our police and fire have social work help and with mental health workers so that police officers can focus on law enforcement and those in the mental health crisis can get what they need. I also promote collaboration between the county and the city in building affordable housing. As a young city, Burien has been incorporated only since the 1990s. The county actually owns more land in Burien than we do, so it's absolutely critical that we coordinate on this level. And for the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, I made sure it went towards small businesses. We are a majority small business community in Burien, much like Vashon, to expand childcare and also apprenticeships that lead to careers. And also, I was chair of the only subcommittee on the council that actually has council members on it, and that's the Burien Airport Committee, where we work with communities outside the official 6 designated airport cities by the Federal Aviation Administration. And we also include the neighborhoods of South Seattle and Beacon Hill that is affected by noise, and also know the concerns of Vashon residents with this regard. And also on City Council, I work to promote respectful debate and dialogue so that we do the business of the people with mutual respect. So as King County Council member, I want to focus on common sense public safety measures with adequate police presence, a healthy environment, and affordable housing for all so that all county residents have the opportunity to prosper. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Teresa Mosqueda, and I'm running for King County Council District 8 to work with the folks here on Vashon-Maury Island, work with the unincorporated area in White Center, and the entire District 8 community. From the Chinatown International District to Burien and Tequila, this is our opportunity to use the crisis of COVID to reset in a more equitable way and to respond to the shadow pandemic that is still plaguing many of our community members. The shadow pandemic being isolation and depression. Whether it's additional abuse or substance abuse, mental health needs, behavioral health needs. The reason that I'm compelled to want to serve you on King County Council is because King County is the place to work on health policy and policy direct intervention and funding through the budget. I tell you this because going to King County Council for me would really be going to the roots of where I started my advocacy world and my career. I am a third-generation Mexican-American. I grew up in a household of educators and activists. My mom was a Head Start teacher and then went on to work for the Higher Education Coordinating Board, so public policy, public workers. And my dad, he taught at Evergreen in political economy and social change. So you better believe that our dinner meetings were all about how do we promote social change? How do we create a more equitable community and an equitable society? And to recognize when our own government and institutions are continuing to perpetuate oppression, whether it's across the globe or in our own homes and in our own backyard. So for me, after graduating the University of Washington and working in public health in CMAR Community Health Centers to finish my graduate program, CMAR offered me a job, and it was my first opportunity to
nigger.
and those who need access to food and housing assistance, and to see firsthand how those programs, those policy interventions can help people on a one-on-one basis. But what was really clear to me as I
Get those niggers out of here.
graduated undergrad was that the systems were failing us far further.
Well, you eat my ass for a quarter.
No one should ever be without a home when they are an elder. That our communities need to have access to good quality housing, access to food, access to diapers, and good living wage jobs. So that's why, after working 2 years,
But my mom needs diapers.
I went on to get my
So, like,
master's of public
Cause
administration.
like every
with
time
focus
I
on
go to the
public
bathroom,
policy.
I shit up
Worked
right
at the
before I go
Department
to the
of
fucking
Health
toilet.
on things like
I don't know how to
safe
control
routes to
that.
schools, walkable, livable communities, getting more healthy food in schools and across our communities. Because when we promote access to walkable neighborhoods and access to good food in our neighborhood grocery stores, that improves the social determinants of health. And when we increase access to good housing and good living wage jobs, that increases the social determinants of health. So for me, working at CMAR and then Department of Health, and then went on to fight for healthcare for all with the Children's Alliance and led the implementation efforts.
We don't give a
Apple
fuck about
Health for Kids,
healthcare.
expanding healthcare to all kids to relieve the stress that parents feel when they don't have access to healthcare for their kiddos. That improves the social determinants of health. And I went from CMAR to work for the Community Health Network of Washington to implement the Affordable Care Act, served on the Exchange Board, right, the Affordable Care Act Implementation Board, appointed twice by Governor Inslee. And
Can
from
I tickle
there,
your booty hole
wanted
for a
to go
quarter?
further upstream. And that's why I went to work for the Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO.
Lady in green jacket. What color is it?
It's not enough to fight for a health insurance card in everyone's pocket. When people are chronically living in poverty, generational poverty, yielding worse health outcomes.
Lady in green, shut the fuck up.
That's why I wanted to make sure that at the State Labor Council, I fought for sick leave for all, help pass minimum wage increases, increased opportunities for immigrants and women of color to get access to good living wage jobs.
I'm a black
And
nigga.
the next
I'm a
step
black
upstream
nigga.
was public policy. So on Seattle City Council, with the support of all of the unions, all of the healthcare advocates, environmental justice folks, Democrats from across our region, I have been able to deliver on increased access to housing,
What are you
quadruple
talking
the
about, sir?
investment in affordable
Cause
housing,
like I need to help my
improved
mother with all
worker
these
protections
things.
for folks left
Cause
out. Think
like I
about
don't
domestic
know.
workers who care for our
Cause I
kiddos and our
need
elders
money
in our
for
homes,
my job.
left out and now protected in Seattle. We increased access to Green New Deal funding so that our buildings and our community is healthier and safer. And with your support, I
Stop
want to
it,
take
dude.
this
That's
commitment
not
to
cool.
investing in our health to King County Council. My commitments to you are to fight to increase access to health services. That's where I started this conversation. Behavioral health, public health, and workforce investments so that we can have a healthier community. Number 2, access to housing for everyone. The neighbor I just spoke to across the street before this started, she said people here on the island are living in their cars and outside. The crisis of homelessness and housing instability is playing out right here on Vashon, just like it is in King County. And number 3, I want to create greater economic opportunity for everyone. Access to good living wage jobs at the county and also in District 8. It is home to all of the unions who have endorsed me. We're talking about Teamsters and grocery workers and all the others. Let's make it a career ladder district. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. And I just want to acknowledge, I know that we do have some shenanigans happening from a Zoom bomb. So Diane is working on that to clean up our dialogue on Zoom. So apologies for that. I did want to just start with questions. And Jake, would you like to kick us off? And we'll do about, oh. Well, I do, and I'll just say, so we'll do about like 3 minutes per question. And again, some of these questions, we're happy to also be in the discovery phase here, right? Vashon is very different, right, from some of our more urban, even, unincorporated areas that are a little more urban. So, we are happy for this as well to be a dialogue. And sort of an opportunity to discover in both ways. So as we ask questions, we hope that we will learn solutions as well as, kind of learn about our discussions for the general. So Jake, go ahead, start us off, and then I'll jump in. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, sorry. Gotta give the mic to the Zoomers.
Pretty loud. Okay, so back in the 1990s and 2000s, I guess you call it, the community council was an unincorporated area council, and Greg Nichols, and then following Dow, and then following Joe McDermott, they either attended our monthly community council general meeting or they sent their aide, and so that there was a direct pipeline for the council member to know what's going on, what's important, what's transpiring and stuff. And so I hope that would still be, that close relationship would still exist. So that was my first thing.
And I will comment on that. Well, and personally, one of the benefits I think of joining the King County Council is I actually get to focus on public policy full time. So Burien City Council is a council manager form of government. We're part-time, I'll put that in quotes, until we have emergencies, which is one of the things that's happened to us recently, and I'm an equal partner in my household. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to not only make a bigger impact on the issues, but fully devote myself to that constituent work that is so important outside of council meetings. And I think it's vitally important that elected officials do have a presence or have relationships or have someone designated so that they have a pulse on the communities they serve. So I would definitely make sure that my office would have a presence here.
Thank you so much. So the community council, you are the council. I think that the King County role in District 8 is to just be the liaison back to King County Council for what the priorities are here. You spend a lot of time focused on trying to raise up issues from the community and make sure that they're getting airtime. What I'd like to do in this King County role is be the liaison back to King County Council to make sure that the resources are there and the policy changes happen. I'll give you one example. When I met with Jason Johnson from Vashon Household last week, He told me that it took 3 years to get the permitting to allow for the affordable housing development that Vashon household wants to do, that the community supported. And it took 3 years to get the permitting for that. In the meantime, $5 million in additional costs now had to be provided to that project 3 years later because of the cost of materials and labor. That's not right. It's better serving for us to make sure that the council priorities, the community priorities here are elevated quickly and expeditiously, and that the funding and policy changes follow. I can do that as your District 8 representative. Not only can I do that, I hope what you've seen from me is that I will do that. Alexis Manzanares, who is my campaign manager. Alexis, raise your hand. She's right here in case you haven't had the chance to meet her. She joined a council meeting, I think 2 months ago, to make sure that we could listen in and hear those priorities. So it's my commitment to you that I will continue that track record of showing up and listening and elevating those issues, because Vashon and White Center, without having a direct elected city council, I believe you are that, and I will elevate those issues to King County Council.
Great, thank you. So wanted to speak a little bit about affordability and some of our very standard questions. A living wage is a human right, but in South King County, that's somewhere between $33 and $40 an hour, and it falls far outside what a small independently owned business can pay or even approach. Vashon is almost exclusively comprised of small independently owned businesses. Rather than addressing the wage side of livability, what strategies can the King County Council deploy to actually decrease the cost of living?
Thank you very much for this question. So as I've met with business owners here, the number one thing that business owners have told me is that they need housing. They need housing for workers to be able to live on the island, so they are not stressed about getting on and off the island, whether it's getting home in time to see their family or pick up their kiddo from the daycare. It is impossible. No offense to all of those of us who want to continue to fight for more, but right now it is really impossible to plan your day around whether or not the ferry is going to show up on time. Last Friday when I was here and I had the chance to meet with the hospital district, and I had the chance to meet with a Vashon homestead or household, as I mentioned, and some other folks, I was trying to get home in time to pick up my daughter, who's 3.5, from daycare. I was aiming for the 3:20 ferry, and it did not show. And I got home just in time to pick her up at just about 5:15. But it was so stressful, right? We don't want any workers that experience that stress when they're coming here for their place of employment, and we want to make it a good place for people to also put their roots down. So number one thing I want to do is increase access to affordable housing and workforce housing on the island. That comes straight from business owners who've talked about it to me themselves, and it also mirrors what we've heard on the other side of the water as well. Business owners want housing and childcare. The number two thing that I'd like to support is additional direct investments with childcare, beefing up the Best Starts for Kids program, supporting the brick and mortar creation of additional childcare or in-home childcare. I saw the beautiful sign and playground next door here right behind the parking lot. Supporting increased access to childcare is a business incentive as well. It is an economic stimulant, and especially it's an economic stimulant for women. I could not go to work if my kiddo wasn't taken care of in daycare, and we know that that's the case during the COVID crisis. It was called a she session for a reason, because many women had to come out of the workforce because there was no place that their kiddos could go. And the last thing, I'll come back to transportation. I would love to see this role, District 8, King County, instead of waiting and working in partnership with our state legislators, which I will do because I have their endorsement and have worked in the halls of Olympia for over 10 years. I will be a good advocate for additional ferry investments. But in the meantime, King County can play a role. I want to see that water taxi, a foot ferry, increase their frequency during the day and later into the evenings, on the weekends and on holidays, to use that as a good living wage job for more people to have access to those King County jobs, and to have that be an economic incentive, not just for people visiting the island, but also for workers who can get back and forth on a more regular and reliable basis so that they can work here if they are living off the island. I think it's a good win-win for workers and for businesses, and it doesn't require a direct adjustment to any wages.
Well, thank you. And I've thought a lot about the affordability since growing up in South Seattle. And my mother was a licensed practical nurse, and so didn't have the earning power of a registered nurse. However, she was able to purchase on her own a 4-bedroom house in South Seattle at that time, $30,000. And the house hasn't changed a whole lot, and it's pretty close. It's about $30,000 short of $1 million now. And when I think about what LPNs work today, which is 60% of average area median income, there is one place in the entire Rainier Valley where she would have been able to afford to provide housing for us, and it's a low-income housing project on Martin Luther King Way. Not a bad thing. I'm glad it's there. But you know, your future does look a little different from the windows of your own 4-bedroom home, right, compared to a complex in a very urban area. So one of the things that in Burien I'm proud of doing is having a variety of affordable housing projects, and we've been able to learn a lot about the advantages and disadvantages of all. So first is a DESC, is the first permanent supportive housing project from that organization outside of Seattle. And that's from 0 to 30%, so the most modest of incomes. We also have Habitat for Humanity. Many people are familiar with that. And EcoThrive, which is our small, affordable cottages for those from 0 to 50%. What's important about those two projects is it provides the ability for modest income families to earn equity, which we know is really key to wealth building here in the United States because of the system that we have. And then finally, we have an apartment complex that is mixed commercial and affordable housing called Connect. Some of the things that we've learned is that while we position ourselves for affordable housing, Habitat, EcoThrive, and DESC were 2 to 4 years out. Now the Connect, which is mixed commercial and low income, that is up in less than a year and a half. So we're on our way to actually having our second apartment complex built like that in the city, and it's the multifamily tax exemption that's really allowed that to happen. So we know that it's that kind of incentive that we need to make sure we keep going. The other piece, you know, Burien has a homelessness crisis, like I'm sure many other communities have, and what I have noticed is that we have a lack, a gap, an emptiness of emergency shelters, and that's something that Burien is trying to reach out in its surrounding communities in terms of partnering about how do we fill that gap, because one city, one area can't take it on alone. It's a giant regional issue and we've barely gotten there. So that's something that I would like to work on. Burien is also considering minimum wage policy in the city. And we, again, as I mentioned, we are a majority small business community, and so we have to think about some businesses will never earn a certain amount. And so do we have to think about, is there a floor in which some businesses may have to be exempted, or at least a really long phase-in period to make that minimum wage when it becomes real? And also, everyone has to have a living wage. But when we talk about minimum wage, I'd like to think that we are getting someone on a path to more prosperity in the future. So it's just the beginning for people. So how do we help people progress along so that they can have that stronger earning power across their lifestyles? And finally, you know, when my mom, at the last years of her life, had a limited income, was a senior, only on Social Security, and I really did appreciate the property tax exemptions that she received from the county, and it was so vital, because when she passed away, not a day passed when I, as someone managing her estate, realized what a jump that was for a senior. So it's those things I think we also need to maintain to support our seniors, and also, again, turning to Burien, having partners where we have affordable senior living in our city as well.
Thank you, Sophia. So back in the 90s and the 2000s, whatever you want to call it. Okay, how's that? Or I'll talk louder. But anyway, in the 90s and 2000s, when I was on the community council, there was, and there still is, there was drafted or created and passed the Public Participation Initiative. It was 1995 King County Motion 9643. And that initiative gave all sorts of, I don't want to call it rights, but things like the directors of the different divisions were ordered to involve the community in planning, be notified of all policies, whether it's a council or whatever else, all new things. You can look it up. It's still there, and it says all of the things that it provides. And that created a great close relationship with this community in that they would notify us about everything they were going to do in our community. And it was really helpful because like one time, I think it was the health department, was going to do issue a permit or something like that for shellfish fishing in the Inner Harbor. And in the grant application, it said that they were going to test all the houses, their septic systems along the shore there, which, it'd been years those houses were there, and it would be, people would have to get out in a month or something like that, they said, if they failed. Anyway, we stopped that cold in its tracks, and as a wise decision for us, but also a wise decision for the county. So many things like that, positive interactions came about because we were involved. So a case in point right now is the county is working on creating a policy that on affordable housing for developers, if they want to develop property for housing, that they have to provide affordable housing also. But there's a loophole there, or an out, in that they can pay a fee in lieu of doing that. And then where does the money go? Follow the money, right? And maybe it's going to go to Kirkland or Bellevue. Who knows where? Too complicated. Our community council last week had a meeting. That was a topic on our agenda, and it was unanimous that the whole community council was opposed to that happening. But they only invite us in sort of at the tail end of these processes where you can be the least effective, and other things like that. The King County Comprehensive Plan, they're working on that now. We used to be involved in that, and I was involved personally in the 2020 Comprehensive Plan all along the way. I haven't heard that when the transportation needs report's coming out, but that's capital projects on the island, and maybe they're all good, but maybe some would be better than others. They also had a plan once on the transportation needs report to do a project in downtown Vashon to put in a signal there, traffic signal. And in all public disclosure, I was with King County DOT for 37 years. Anyway, yeah, so my question coming around is what do you think you can do, would you want to do, can you do to get get that engagement happening again for our community and our community council? Thank you.
Well, the city of Buren has a number of councils. For example, the Planning Commission. Some of you have seen the issues with the Planning Commission on the news there. Parks, Airport Committee, as I mentioned before. And I think it's also really important for King County to have a level of those committees. However, I would also be careful in duplicating any of the voices that the cities may have already cultivated, because, for example, in the city of Buren, we recruit people into our advisory committees to be representative of the community. And we also require, and we have a pretty detailed handbook, is that people need to listen to everyone. They need to have a really broad perspective, and that sometimes they're going to need to put their individual opinions aside for the good of your community. So that's something that I would support, is, identify with individual communities. And having lived throughout the county, I just have a real appreciation of just the variety of jurisdictions, cities, unincorporated, incorporated, urban, and rural, and that they all have their different cultures, and it does take time to figure out, so who's who? Who are the movers and shakers? Who really makes that change and knows their community well, and making sure we tap into those voices. But having said that as well, I think that the county and the city can partner to maybe have some ideas that haven't been thought of before, because the county is a pretty high level. In some ways, we provide that real key foundation to a community. So one of the things when I said that my parents moved us out to unincorporated King County, it is modern day Issaquah Plateau and now Sammamish. Nobody wanted us. There were thousands of us. They thought we were going to overrun their city, which was Issaquah at the time. Sammamish didn't exist. But looking back, I really appreciated it. It was the county's role to make sure that our septic systems were all in line, that we had transportation, basic utilities, and to this day, Sammamish depends on the King County Sheriff. And it's just those fundamental services that can really help a community either thrive or just merely survive over time. So I think I just can't forget that the county is there to help a jurisdiction have a solid foundation, but as a city and the community, it's like there is support that we can give to you so that you can continue to grow that unique character that you have for your own communities.
Thank you so much. I want to answer your question really directly. This comes from the conversations I've had with folks over the last 3 to 4 months. I've been out here every 3 weeks. People have said, Vashon-Maury Island, unique needs and need to be treated as such. This is not an area that has had an abundance of resources from the county in the past. And it is not an area that, as you noted, is first thought of when outreach is beginning on massive county plans. I want to be your county council member who first thinks about unincorporated areas to get feedback directly from community. I hear this from the conversation that I had with Kevin Jones in the first month that I announced. He was one of the first people that I met with, and he mentioned how he was working on an environmental impact assessment, the environmental needs on the island, and how we can elevate those to the county level to make sure that there's additional resources and policy change to address the most pressing crisis in our globe, and that is climate change. You all, I think, are on, unfortunately, the cutting edge sometimes of seeing how climate change is impacting our communities. Last week, I think it was last week, we were talking about folks trying to make it over from Maury Island to Vashon Island, and with the king tide that happened, the road was impassable. You see it on a daily basis, like today, when large trucks were told, do not travel between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. because the steep on the ramp is going to be so immense that you're not going to be able to get your trucks in and out of the ferry. We need to collectively be addressing climate change, and I feel like the unique voices and the unique needs on Vashon Island that can be elevated from the community directly are a great example of where we should be looking to the community first for providing impact, and then that further informs conversations later. I think the same thing is true when we look at transportation needs. Senator Sharon Nelson, who has endorsed my campaign, has reminded me every time that I meet with her that the needs of this island will always be in the crosshairs because those water taxis, I call them foot ferries still, the water taxis are unique to this island, right? And the entire county pays for them, but it's unique to serving this community. We need to make sure that the voices and the needs of business owners that you just mentioned in your previous question, elders and family members, like the folks I was meeting with before this meeting who travel off the island to go see their loved ones in hospitals and long-term care facilities, that they are thought of, and the kiddos who need to get back and forth to make sure that they have regular and routine access to Seattle, that they're also thought of. This is about economic health and the health of our population. And lastly, this is how I do my work, right? Which you've seen from me, and in case you haven't seen this from me before, I think folks, when I first came to the Seattle City Council, they thought, oh, she's just gonna be about labor. Yes, I will always be about investments in labor and worker protections, but the way that we do that is by sitting down at the table and having tough conversations. That's what I used to do, sit across the table from folks who might not agree on a daily basis, but you bargain and you discuss and you negotiate and you hear where there's common grounds. That is what I will continue to do at King County Council and make sure that we sit down and directly hear from folks affected. That's what I did with gig worker protections and had the employers at the table, just like hoteliers when I passed hotel protections, just like domestic workers when we had hiring entities at the table. I think of the folks on Vashon as being the direct people affected by any public policy change that the county is considering. And like I've done all of my public policy engagement, I will do it directly with folks most affected here. So I hope that's a good example of me wanting to make sure that that commitment, and I will look it up, 9643, is that correct? 9643. I will look it up and make sure that I stay true to that.
All right, I'm going to do one more question here from moderators, and then we'll do audience questions. And I'm going to press a little bit and cross-train. Both of you have some municipal experience, and we're going to talk about some uniquely unincorporated problems. So, for instance, Seattle has relied heavily on the housing levy to fund affordable units, and Burien has a layer of municipal taxation to work with to provide basic services. Those are not options on Vashon. Teresa, how would you find direct and meaningful funds in King County to build affordable housing? And Sofia, how would you find funds in a King County budget to provide basic government services like public trash cans in the town core?
Thank you so much. It has been really, really beneficial to talk with folks directly on the island about what you have been trying to do, whether it was with Vashon Household or other folks like another conversation I had before today that told me what we really need to be doing at King County is expediting the ability to do ADUs and DADUs, accessory dwelling units and detached dwelling units, where folks want to build additional housing on their land, either to supplement their income or to just allow for more people to live on this island, to help reduce the cost of just being able to stay in your home. These are things that I think that the county can do by expediting permits. It should have not taken 3 years to get the okay to build affordable housing that the community wanted when that just added time. So number one, I would want to expedite permits to make sure that we build faster. Waiting takes time takes money, and it is imperative that we address this most pressing crisis. Number two, I want to make sure that we are building on the land that is available. When we build land, for example, in the city of Seattle on public land, instead of selling it to the highest bidder, we reduce the cost of creating housing by 15%. Now, you might remember when in 2017, when I first came to Seattle, they were selling off the Mercer mega block to the highest bidder, a large piece of property that could have been used either for affordable housing or public space. I came in and I said, that's unacceptable. Surplus public property should remain in public hands, and we should use it for the public's good. Housing, parks, green space, play areas. That's what I did at the city, and I commit to you that I will continue to do that at the county. When we build things like affordable housing on publicly owned land where the city has sanctioned it and wants, or where the community, I should say, has sanctioned it and wants it, it reduces the cost of building by 15%. And lastly, I want to be that hub of building trades jobs in District 8. Another reason that the cost of construction continues to rise is because we do not have enough construction workers across our region, frankly, across this country. But we see costs escalate because there's not enough workers on that site. I have the endorsement of Seattle Building Trades, laborers 242, iron workers. Every single building trades construction union has endorsed me. In fact, every union that is endorsed has endorsed me. And I want to use our District 8 as an actual training hub. All of these labor halls, all of the apprenticeship programs that are located in this district could be our tool for helping to reduce costs if we get more folks into these trades. And that especially starts with women and folks of color who were on the front line during COVID, exposed their health and their family's health to risk in the front lines. Those are often minimum wage jobs, but people are often working there at 40, 50, and 60. I want people to be able to transition to building and construction jobs if they're in their mid-career, and also to see it as their entry point for starting their career. So those are 3 ways: expediting permits, being smart stewards of the public land, and getting more people into these construction jobs.
Well, in terms of being the type of jurisdiction that you are, oh, can you hear this okay? How's that? Okay, just rotate it a little bit. I think I was at the wrong angle. being an unincorporated area of King County, I think puts you at a special priority for the county itself because you don't have that municipal level. So I think that should always be a really key part of the thinking when I'm at King County, thinking about how do we support communities. Well, if they don't have a municipal layer, then the county certainly has an even larger role to support your infrastructure and also all of those things that allow you to grow in the long term. The other piece as well is that, now I just lost my train of thought. In terms of affordability, okay, the county would have to work a little harder to see how policies meant to encourage growth and density because of our housing shortfall actually fit with Vashon, okay, because you don't have that municipal layer. And so what that means, for example, I'll just use Burien for example. From a high level, it's really great that we would take advantage of our major thoroughfares, and I'll name two, Ambom and First Avenue. They're major thoroughfares that are currently denser than the rest of the city, and they can take you straight into Seattle. The thinking being that most people who work in Seattle actually live in the communities like Burien. But at the same time, you have to take into account the geography. So we too have a shoreline. We're actually one of the first cities to pass a climate action plan, which I'm really proud to have done that. But also something like Ambom sits right on that top of this ridge, right? And so you have to make sure that you take into account, if you're gonna be really dense and you realize the infrastructure, the runoff, the type of construction that needs to happen, that's where you really need community input. It's like, okay, if we're gonna do this together, increase your density, let's make sure that we have the perspective of your residents, Vashon, so that the density is well planned. So someone mentioned the comprehensive plans. That's the most important plan for a city to put in because that is the vision for how you're gonna grow with your community for the next 20 years, which is really key. The other piece too that's important to know, and Vashon is different because you are an island, is that in smaller communities to have the county support you in the data information to help you solve your issues. I worked a lot in terms of getting Burien's numbers out of these bigger jurisdictions like Seattle and Bellevue, which can really drive and overshadow King County data. So I really had to push to work to say, how is COVID impacting Burien's community, especially if we know that there were significant health disparities. Hispanic community, which is the largest community in Burien, 2 or 3 times the death and hospitalization rate of the white community. And we had to know that data, A, to know how is our community being affected, and 2, what strategies do we need to actually combat this? And I'm still working on it as a member of the Public Health Advisory Board for the governor because the legislature recognized that there needs to be different voices looking at public health, which is, again, a key infrastructure service that the county provides to everyone. And we still haven't really tackled that, but I'm committed to doing that because that is something that affects all of our communities. So I just want to stress, I'll stress that the uniqueness of Vashon has to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, and real quick, Jake, so we're respectful of the audience question.
I've got a short question.
1 minute each.
Yeah. So increased budget for essential services such as our roads and let's say our sidewalks, our pedestrian pathways, many of them aren't friendly to persons with disabilities and to the elderly. The Darton access buses could probably use a higher resource level. The Metro bus could have more frequent trips so people can make it to their doctor's appointments off island. The water taxi, as was mentioned earlier, could have a more universal schedule. And roads, the people on the island do very well, work real hard, but the funding isn't there. I was on the road crew here 37 years ago, and there were more people on that crew than now when there's more roads and there's a lot more people and a lot more use. So increasing funding in those areas I see as prime.
Well, just a comment. I know that smaller jurisdictions, again, because Burien has very similar challenges being a small jurisdiction, is often when you go after those grants for transportation that come federally, your application isn't going to go through because you can't compete with the larger jurisdictions. And that's something that I think that the county, King County is just one of the most prominent, largest, well-resourced counties, honestly, in the country. And so we can leverage that presence to really talk to our congressional legislation, so this is one example, to have a more fairly and equitable distribution of those funds so that we can better support our communities. Demographics, you know, people over the age of 55 are exploding exponentially. So of course we have to take into account that we have accessible sidewalks, that our metro and bus systems take into account that we have older people that may want to use that more frequently as a form of transportation. So making sure that fares are equitable, that they're collected, that they are at a level that are affordable, is something that we really need to do given what we know about the changing demographics.
Thank you. I mentioned one of my first jobs at the Department of Health was working in the community health division, where we focused, is this thing working still? Yes, okay. Where we focused on safe routes to schools. And I carried that commitment to trying to connect neighborhoods and connect streets through every aspect of public policy. It's something that I worked on at the Children's Alliance, it's something that I worked on at the State Labor Council, and it's something that I continue to fund at Seattle City Council. Lots of folks probably know that the north end of Seattle and the south end doesn't have a lot of sidewalks, right? It was incorporated later. So we're talking about neighborhoods that have gravel or force people to walk and stroll on the street. That is not healthy. I'm always committed, and I will continue to be committed at King County Council, to making sure that we have walkable, livable neighborhoods so people can stroll and walk. And I say stroll, whether or not you're pushing a stroller or you're riding a wheelchair, making sure that people who are with kiddos or are walking by themselves feel safe by putting in protective lanes to make sure that the sidewalk is not actually right up against the street, or that you're not sharing the street with a vehicle. Those are some of the things that I've done. And the reason that I think it's so exciting to talk about these things is because it's all public health, right? Public health is where I started doing this work with safe routes to schools and connected sidewalks and communities. And public health is the reason that I want to go to King County. That is where the budget and the policy area is at the county level. And as much as I've tried to do that work at the city, it's really at the county level where there's the funding and the public health department for us to deploy these resources. So similar to what I've tried to do and expand access to safe routes, whether it's protected sidewalks, protected bike lanes, and safe opportunities for us to slow traffic where pedestrians are close by. I will do that at the county, and I'm excited about the opportunity to take it to scale for the residents of Vashon.
All right, thank you. It's fantastic to hear this. We have been consistently told there is no funding for any of the proposals that have been brought forth on the stage today. So fantastic to hear that we might be able to look forward to this. All right, so we are about a little bit over time. So I want to be a little bit stringent with our rules for audience questions. No more than 1 minute to ask your question. So, make sure there's a question in there, and 1 minute to ask your question, and we'll be punctual with it. And then we'll do 2 minutes each for the candidates to respond to the questions. And Diane, do we have any questions queued up online? All right, let's start with an audience question from online.
Okay, can you hear me up there? Here's without the mic. Well, the people on Zoom need to hear me. Okay, Annie Phillips has a question. If you're elected, how would you incentivize landlords to weatherize homes and apartments, install heat pumps, and install EV chargers in multifamily buildings?
Thank you, and thank you to Annie and the members of the 33rd and the 34th Economic Justice Caucus, or Environmental Justice Caucus. It's been really great to meet with many of them over the last few months. I had just had a conversation with Annie, actually, in Burien at Strawberry Fest, and I was saying that our family wanted to get mini splits in our house, but one year it cost $15,000 to do so, and then the next year, because we thought, well, we can't afford that, the next year this extreme heat came back because of global warming, and the cost that we were given was $25,000, and that is just unattainable for working families, for folks who are low income. It is really expensive, but it doesn't have to be that way. Annie gave me the resource for some other folks who are trying to get into this work and who have provided a lower estimate. And so I think it's about three things. Number one, making sure that we don't have certain companies or just a few companies sort of monopolizing who people go to, and getting the word out about who can do this work and really trying to drive the cost down for more working families and seniors. Number two, I know that in the city of Seattle, and I'm sure it's probably true for King County, that you have to have a certain license to be able to install many of these units. Our former Councilmember O'Brien, who is an incredible environmental justice champion, is now actually in the business of trying to install mini splits, and they have been stalled in getting their license because they need certain credentials in order to do it. Let's be creative here, folks. This is the most pressing crisis for our community, and if people don't have access to air with the extreme heat that we've seen, people will die. It is not hyperbole, especially our elders and folks with complicated health conditions. It is a matter of life and death. So I would like to increase access to those who can get into this industry by reducing the licensing requirements. Think of it this way, right? We know we have a dental crisis. We don't have enough dentists or dental hygienists out there. So what have we been working on for the last 15 years that I worked on at the Children's Alliance and then worked on at the Washington State Labor Council? Dental hygienists. We were told it was impossible to get another credentialing, and they just got it past the state legislature last year. We need to be flexible and creative in terms of how we think about licensing. And then the second thing is incentives for low-income families, for seniors. We need to be reducing the cost for hookups and for getting people the ability to install heat pumps, mini splits, and EV hookups. These are things that are public policy and funding related, and we should be providing the opportunity for more people to have access to those resources and reducing the barriers to get into that licensing.
Okay, so I believe the question was incentivizing landlords with more climate-friendly technology, and that was the chargers and the heat pumps. So again, I think at King County Council, you have to look at the county's role and also a municipality role, if there is a role. So and I appreciate Annie and her group working with, knowing that there was a Burien City Council talking about funding that we were able to get from the federal government around where should those funds be, should be invested in. And initially it was all about car chargers, but having reviewed the data in terms of, it's actually homes, at least in the city of Burien, that the heat pumps, we wanted to give funding for both education and also allowing residents to convert their homes and use heat pumps. We know we couldn't fund every single person that really wanted one, but at the same time, there hasn't been enough education done to the public in terms of what benefits heat pumps can do. In terms of the county level, the county has a real opportunity to be a standard center. So for example, building codes come from the county as well. And we have been consistently reviewing the county building codes. We know that the county is progressively looking at more green standards, and that's something that we readily adopt. So I just wanted to point that out as a major point of influence in the county, is that adopting more progressive modern building codes that built into that will promote healthier homes is something that we should definitely do.
All right, so we will go now to we'll go to audience questions here. We have a microphone up here. If you'd like to come up to the microphone, you do need to come up to the microphone because they can't hear you on Zoom. If you'd like a microphone brought to you, we do have one that we can also bring to you, but you do have to use the microphone. Yes, please come on up. And yeah, please limit your question to less than a minute, and then we'll go to 2 minutes each for the candidates.
This is a question for Sofia. You know me, Sofia. I supported your city council campaign, and I'm sorry to ask this question, but we got a situation in Burien that came up in the past week where the chair of the planning commission was fired by the council, and subsequent to that, almost the entire planning commission quit, and so did the members of other volunteer groups. Now, you're the mayor. You presided over the meeting. I watched it. You were the swing vote, and whether it was your intent or not, it made the situation worse. And my question to you is, do you feel like the role of a county council member is to increase conflict or to decrease conflict? And what are you going to do about this in Burien?
Thank you, Ivan, and I will recognize it is a difficult situation. And interesting that you called me the swing vote, because that appears to be my reputation. And over the last 4 years, I think it's a positive one, because people know that they can't tell, honestly, where I'm going to come down on the issue. Because why? Because it depends on the issue. And it depends on what the communities will tell me from a broad range of voices where I'm going to land. Is it King County Council's job to make people, what do you say, I think more decisive or together? You know, I think that we have a huge issue with polarization, and that a lot of the voices are on extreme ends. And government elected work is very difficult, because you do need to look at the broad spectrum of voices. Okay, and you often get caught in the middle. Now, I think as a mayor, I am figuratively and literally in the middle. My job as a mayor, I'm in the middle, I preside. I make sure all my council members are heard. Doesn't matter if I agree with them or not. There are rules. You have a certain number of comments, you have a certain number of time. And my job that day was to make sure we have the smooth process for a very tense and controversial situation. Now, a comment about our advisory committees. You know, we invite people to be a member of our team in the city of Burien. They are advisory. They provide recommendations. We rely on them to really dig into technical and sometimes kind of mundane issues. Sometimes it's not real sexy work, okay, to know the zoning of every nook and cranny of the city. But at the same time, you know, to cause that fracturing within the city, that undermines the credibility of the city of Burien. And we want to build that confidence with our residents that we will make difficult choices, and not everyone is going to agree with us, but we have to make those choices. So I think that, and you know, the planning commission members, I know they all resigned, but honestly, in the United States of America, they can continue to be activists as they please, but they just have to think about in what role do they want that to be, right? Okay, thank you, Ivan.
I'll comment on this as well. I think it's an important question about how we take the temperature down. I have been watching the Burien City Council meetings as well, because what happens in our region is important for the city of Seattle, specific to homelessness. When I heard 2 meetings ago that the county had offered $1 million and 25 tiny houses from Pallet Shelter, immediately I called King County Executive Dow Constantine's office to ask what the offer was. And they confirmed for me that they were offering $1 million, and now it's 35 tiny house pallet shelters, 100 plus parking spaces by freeing up another parcel of land so that people could actually encamp in a place that was secured with a fence, and King County would move vehicles to allow for that. When you work in partnership and do true collaboration, you find solutions that don't make it so that you have to have a headline, but you find solutions so that you can serve the most vulnerable community. $1 million was offered by the county, tiny houses, and the support to get people through until DESC, which the county is paying for, opens. That's what it looks like to find solutions. I am proud that I've been endorsed by folks at DESC, by King County Executive Dow Constantine, by the Regional Homelessness Authority's Chief of Staff, because they have seen me try to broker tough conversations and find solutions for our most vulnerable. I will agree, this is a tough issue. It is the most pressing crisis around our region. And I'll also agree, it's really hard to serve in these times right now. Whether it's in this area or across the country, I serve on the National League of Cities, and both red and blue jurisdictions are dealing with a lot of stress and frustration. But it is our job to find solutions and not scapegoat or pin something on someone else or point fingers. I will be the person I've continued to show you that I am over the last 6 years, and that is someone who finds solutions to our tough problems and crises, invests in our most vulnerable, and makes sure that we can solve problems. That is what I will commit to doing with you, and I'm continuing to, in my current role, see what other additional land we can free up through the Seattle City Light properties in the Burien area to try to offer some additional support as well. People need safe places to live until DESC is open, and that $1 million can provide security, bathrooms, and counseling services. I'm looking forward to having greater solutions in our region going forward.
All right, Diane, do we have a question online, please?
Yes, our next question is from Susan Lewis. She asks, long-term rental housing is adversely affected by the proliferation of Airbnb rentals on Vashon. What would you do to balance the need for long-term rentals with people's desire to maximize the economic potential of their rental properties?
Thank you very much, Amy. I had a great conversation when we were out here last time talking about this very issue affecting places like Vashon, up and down the West Coast, places that are smaller communities but being really outpaced by the desire to see tourism and rental units turned into Airbnbs instead of long-term rentals for workers and families. There has to be a balance, and I don't want to I don't want to overstep it, because I recognize King County, just like Seattle City Council, we cannot direct business, or we cannot direct property owners what they can do with their own property. The Constitution is very clear in this state that we can't tell property owners what they can do, but we can help. We can help by offering additional supportive places for people to be able to call home through building additional rental units and putting some restrictions, I think, on how much the Airbnbs or short-term rentals can be utilized in our region. We did that in the city of Seattle, and I think we need to do more, frankly. I'd be very interested in looking at a vacancy tax, perhaps, to see if there's a way to incentivize more people to have people stay in their rental units long-term. And of course, we want to make sure that there's a thriving tourist way for people to come to the island and stay. I know that I've looked into Airbnbs too when I wanted my family to come out here a few times. But we need to be able to make sure that the folks who are here long-term, the workers, the residents, have places to call home. And so I'd be interested in having those conversations with folks who rent out their units as Airbnb rentals, and folks who want additional rental units, to find the right solution and not impose something without that discussion.
I too would look at many ways in which we can balance the use of Airbnb so that they are more available for residential uses, especially if there is a supply shortage like we have here. And other states and other cities, I'd be really open to looking at their different methods and see if they have similar challenges that we do here and what we might want to pilot and try out.
And I'd like to just ask a discovery question. You know, for instance, looking around, like Gig Harbor, right, has regulations and moratoriums. And is that something that is possible as unincorporated King County? Can we look to the King County Council to craft an enforceable policy on Vashon?
I think the answer is yes. Yes for the unincorporated areas. Yes for Vashon-Maury. Yes for White Center as well. We know that, for example, the limitations at the county really don't mean that we can impose things like hazard pay, right? In areas where there's already jurisdictional representation from Seattle, Burien, Tequila, et cetera. But hazard pay was something that was absorbed here when the county decided to pass that during COVID. So I think it's a great example of showing that we can use the county council to put forward additional moratoriums or restrictions or incentives for those to really make sure that the long-term rentals go to workers and residents of this area. One more sort of anecdote from last Friday when I was here, somebody said, sometimes you'll come over. I don't know if this is the conversation that we had when we were talking about, anyways, I won't call out people in that meeting, but one person told me that a small business owner told them, sometimes you'll see so many tourists here walking up and down the sidewalk, and the restaurants will be closed because there's not enough workers, because workers don't live on the island. That is a crisis, and I hope it's okay that I shared that example, Tom. And thank you again for explaining it, because I think it really shows we have tourism, that's great, but unless we have people to live on this island and work on this island and keep those small businesses open, it's not a thriving local economy.
Well, I think King County, given the amount of resources, is in a great position to provide grants to jurisdictions such as Vashon Island, unincorporated areas, and Pilot, and see based on the data what we should go and partner with the community as to where we should go. Cities, I know that we're incorporated entities. We're often known as where experimentation happens. What new things should we be doing to accommodate our growing and developing and changing communities? So I think King County is definitely in a great position to support Vashon and any type of pilot project it might want to do.
Okay, do we have an in-house question? If you would come up to the microphone, please.
So one of the reasons that we have a lot of Airbnbs proliferating on the island is because taxes are high and people are trying to make ends meet. And I wonder if you could address high taxes and maybe how that could be brought down.
Well, definitely Washington State is at the bottom of equitable taxes across the nation. And this is a really long haul with the state legislature, but it's to really look at how we can more equitably distribute the responsibility of taxation across our state. So while we might try to do something locally, and honestly it might result in nibbling around the edges but not really getting at the core of the problem, it is working more closely with the state legislature and voicing our needs and our concern, and that we need to change that system around.
Thank you for your question. And I mean, thanks as well to the generous support for voters, right? From everything from the hospital district to the more recent crisis care levy that I was proud to help craft at the beginning of last year. These are investments going into so much needed program investments that from housing to direct behavioral health services. And I think residents realize that, but at a certain point, we all are concerned about voter fatigue and especially the disproportionate impact on seniors and low-wage workers. And on the island, I think it's also a fair question. Taxes are being paid in, and the benefit, the return on that investment, you want to see in your infrastructure. So I get the fatigue is really wearing on folks. I've heard that from a few conversations. There's a number of things that I would like to do so that we don't have to constantly think about just property tax as being the sole source of revenue, or frankly, having to raise the sales tax, which we know has a disproportionate impact on low-wage workers and seniors as well. I've worked for 10 years plus at the state legislature. I have the endorsement of all of the 34th LD legislators. I want to use that relationship to give us at the county, I want to use that relationship to give the county, and when I'm there, us, additional resources to have more tools in our tool belt so that we don't have to go to property tax as the go-to. There's a few things that I'd be interested in looking at. Number one, the County of Los Angeles just last November authorized a progressive real estate excise tax for properties of more than $5 million. If we applied something like that around the county and thought about, maybe Bellevue and some of the other east side sales that are happening, maybe an additional property tax that was progressive wouldn't necessarily impact local sales here, but it could bring in additional revenue to the county, and I'd be very interested in penciling that out to see what that looks like. Number two, I think that it would really be exciting to continue the work that King County Executive has done and our county partners have done for progressive payroll tax, wanting to make sure that it works for the largest businesses, of course, but the wealth in this region is immense, and not having to go to property tax year over year would, I think, be a very important relief for our residents and for our local economies.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the siloing of wealth in King County is a big problem for Vashon, for sure. All right, I think we did we just do an online? No, we just did it in person, so let's go to an online question.
Okay, our next online question is from Jason Johnson, who's the Executive Director of Vashon Household. He asks, there is a housing scarcity and affordability crisis on Vashon Island. If elected, what will you do to prioritize Vashon and expedite planning, code review, funding, permitting, and contracting to develop more housing on the island?
Great, and yeah, let's get as specific as possible with that versus supporting those things. What sort of specifically can you do with your teammates on the county council to make Vashon a priority? And we'll start with Sofia.
Well, in this unincorporated area, as I mentioned before, I think you have a special priority in terms of the county focusing on your needs. And also a lot of residents tend to gravitate towards unincorporated areas. There is new state legislation to allow more density per lot. That's something that the county needs to be in conversation with Vashon about how we make that happen, where best to make that happen, knowing that you know your geography best. And also as needs grow, we're having a second year of 10% inflation, that the budget is going to come under pressure, and that is a great opportunity to look at those processes in the county that may slow down the permitting, and make sure we streamline that so it doesn't get in the way of the access to housing that Vashon envisions for itself.
Thanks. Hello, Jason. I didn't know you were on the screen. I hope it's okay that I mentioned you like I mentioned Tim in our earlier conversations. But these have been very informative discussions. So thank you for asking the question. I'm going to try to be very specific about ways that I think the county could expedite additional housing in this area. And not only is it important for us to do, we know that 70%, 69% of King County residents in 2019, prior to COVID, were spending more than a third of their income on housing. That means they're housing insecure, right? That was before the COVID crisis. And housing has only gotten worse. Housing instability has only gotten worse during the COVID crisis. So it was a crisis, it continues to be, and let's do some solutions to fix it. Number one, currently, I don't believe that Vashon and White Center and unincorporated areas are a priority for the county. I want them to be a priority for the county. I want to put at the front of the line review and consideration of the various proposals that are coming from unincorporated counties so that we can try to expedite that. If I'm wrong about that, fantastic. But that's not what I've heard from my earlier conversations, and I want to make sure that that's the reality, that they do get expedited. Number two, in terms of codes, permitting, and planning, all of these things are hurdles that require funding at each stage. We should be removing the funding requirements, especially for affordable housing. When we develop affordable housing, it should get expedited to the front of the line, and those funding and fee requirements should be removed. And especially, want to add to this, an incentive for building green. If you're going to build affordable housing and build it green, we should also put you further at the front of the line. I have experience with doing this at the City of Seattle, specifically for community of color-led organizations who are trying to build housing for folks most affected by displacement in Seattle. We put those folks at the front of the line when they tried to build affordable housing for the community that meets their needs. Here on Vashon, I see that playing out with a community that's often affected by displacement from the island being seniors and elders, folks who need access to affordable housing in perpetuity. We want to make sure that that is being expedited and affordable housing continues. And number three is remove utility hookup fees. We're trying to do that in the City of Seattle so that water and electricity does not have to be paid when you're building affordable housing, back to the very entity that's trying to pay for affordable housing. So let's get rid of some of those hurdles.
Great, thank you. And Debbie, I think we have a question down front here. Would you like a mic? Yes. All right, let's get a mic down here.
Yeah. One question I'd actually like to ask to both candidates. Some people kind of consider this island surrounded by Puget Sound, and other people call it a moat. And I think sometimes we are treated very differently. What would you do? Well, right now, access and the infrastructure, and you was mentioned about the sidewalks. And I just do not see King County Building Department even enforcing the codes that we have right now. Our post office could not have designed a wheelchair accessible place. It's an accident waiting to happen. And what can you do as candidates to ensure that agencies like the King County Building Department, King County Sheriff's Office have more connection, direct connection to the island, and really respond to the people here?
Thank you for that question. And I sometimes accused of being aggressively collaborative. So I'd like to take that title and have conversations that I convene here on the island with the leads from within those departments. Often I've tried to do that in the city of Seattle too, where we convene the meeting and we identify across silos how to find solutions. I did that in Ballard, for example, and brought in the police department, city light, transportation, Department of Neighborhoods to all directly hear from some of the community members who were having issues that affected all of the departments. Because one email to each department, unless we break down the silos, is not going to solve the issues. And if folks are out here and hearing directly from the community affected by the issues, the infrastructure, the needs, I think that we can more quickly find solutions and break down those silos. So one quick idea is directly bringing people out here and having those roundtable discussions with the community affected and making it part of my job because it's part of their job too. With the community council, for sure.
And I think you bring up a really great point around, as I mentioned before, the county's major role in any community is that underlying infrastructure. And what can we do to make sure that you have that? So, when I think about sidewalks and some of the things that you mentioned, that's all about public safety. And there's actually an environmental design component of public safety in that we need to be mindful about how communities develop so that it actually increases safety, and it's not just the one answer of the law enforcement or sheriff's department. So this is something that Vashon and Buren definitely share in common, is making sure we have equitable law enforcement. But there is an environmental design component of it. And community input is definitely important because, again, you have unique needs that you may not, someone like me may not know because I'm at the county level. So there's necessarily some distance between Vashon and myself when I take that office, and I really do need some direct input from the community itself. I do believe that sometimes in government, the processes that we do to solve problems is often the most important thing we do. It's even more important sometimes than the actual outcome, because process is what ensures that all voices are heard, all considerations are made, the data is taken into consideration, and not just be driven by one viewpoint from the get-go. It's really creating that process so everyone is heard and that we can have the greatest benefit for everyone.
All right, we have, I think, time for at least 2 more questions. Do we have any questions online before we go back to, all right, come on down.
I'm not that short. Just gotta take this off here. Hi, thank you for the opportunity. I just want to comment on a couple of things. One is that many years ago, at least 10 years or so ago, we had a community council that had official connections with the county. And the county dissolved all those community councils of their, basically of their power to talk to the county at a certain level. And there's a sense here on the island that the county no longer really takes us seriously, that they give us lip service and they appear to, we appear to have their ear, but then we don't really get much of a response from them. And I'm wondering what you, as a council person on the future council, will be able to do to change that. I think that we need to have some official agency within our role with that government. Thank you.
Great. We'll start with Sofia, and there is a very long history to the dissolution of the prior Vashon Community Council. There's a long and winding road to that. But yeah, if you could, keep elucidating on how we can collaborate.
Well, and clearly the community council is something that's very important to this community, and so I would certainly support or not support disbanding and suppressing voices. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, which is a danger. Now, one of the things that I think policymakers have to think about, because there has been legislation I've seen where sometimes community councils, in the way that it's composed, who's in it, who's being engaged, sometimes can block progress for communities. So I just want to have more of that conversation around what are the things that are preventing you to communicate to the county that we need to hear in order to support the things you want to get done moving forward. What's the other? I had another comment, but it might come back to me later.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer, and I appreciate that there's been a long and winding road, and I've heard some of it, and I would love to hear more. So for me, I will commit to making sure that I'm out here and doing the hard work, being a listener and an action taker, making sure that the policies that are being discussed are informed and informed early so that it's not at the 11th hour or late in the game, and that there's truly the policy path towards making additional changes with the input from the community here. A good example would be to make sure with the comprehensive plan that anything that the island is currently considering, contemplating, maybe once in 5 years, not 10, gets included in an environmental impact assessment so that that action could be taken prior to any major changes. That way we can tee up venues for or opportunities for changes to policies within the time frame that a policy is in place. A comprehensive plan, as we know, only comes up about, every 10 years? 4? Okay. Yeah, the cities is 10 too, but then there's the minor changes midway through. So every 10 years, oh my gosh, how much has the region grown in the last 10 years? Not only has our population grown, but especially because of COVID, the needs have grown. So if we use that as a good example of saying, if there's something in the hopper that we would like to see on this island, we should be creating the policy valves, the levers to be able to explore that so that when we're ready to take action on something, we have the go-ahead versus having to jump through bureaucratic hoops to make something happen. Overall, it is direct engagement with the community council, making sure that that information gets the due time and diligence in front of departments and the funding that it needs in the budget, and then doing what I've continued to do, hold community roundtables on a frequent basis to make sure that feedback is constant and policies always being evaluated, and ensuring that the budget as a moral document follows the morals of investing in our communities in most need, and that includes Vashon for District 8.
Yeah, if you have not read the full story of how our former community council was dissolved and why, it's a good read. It's a really good read, actually, to understand, what the newest iteration is and how we might be able to safely, I'll use the word safely, collaborate. All right, are there any further questions? Yeah, Debbie.
I have one about endorsements, and for each of you, there were some endorsements that you had on your website that from people that I really respect. So for Teresa Mosqueda, it was Bob Ferguson, and for Sofia, it was Eileen Cody, our long, hardworking 34th rep. So I just wondered if you could respond to why did they endorse you?
Let's start with Sofia.
I'm particularly proud of having Eileen's endorsement because she is a no-frills person, incredibly direct, and we have figuratively been in the boxing ring together for years on end. So we're both nurses, and I guess I'm proud to know that I've been on both sides of issues with her. She's been a champion for me. Sometimes she doesn't agree. She could be really curt about it, but to have earned her respect over time means the world to me.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this question. I think that Bob Ferguson, as you know, has been on the front lines fighting for human rights, basic rights, fighting against corporate greed, and really helping to make sure that our basic rights are protected, not only during the Trump administration, but also continues to lead the efforts. And I believe, he has seen me similarly stand up and fight for our most vulnerable communities, stand up to large corporations in the face of intimidation, and to work with the community affected to make sure that their voices are leading the policy changes. That's what I see him do in his fights in court, in the courtroom, and he continues to win. I'm proud that I have his endorsement, and our current governor, Governor Inslee, U.S. Representative Jayapal, all of the serving 34th Legislative District Democrats, and as I mentioned, our very own from the island, Senator Sharon Nelson, who I have worked with not only at the State Labor Council when I lobbied, but on the Children's Alliance as well. And these folks have seen me advocate for our community's most vulnerable. So I think that's why.
Okay, and we'll switch over to questions to the audience here in a second, but we do have a minute, and I want to ask one more question because it came up about the water taxi and the metro, right? The water taxi appears to be an attractive solution to increasing workforce availability, but there's a problem with getting workers from the dock to their jobs. Currently on Vashon, there are 2 bus routes with limited service that don't always line up with Fauntleroy or water taxi service. But a big driver of that limited capacity is the inability to recruit workers, right? There are not even enough workers to fill the bus service that we already have. So despite the wage there is good, right? That it's comparably impressive wage and benefits package. So at a municipal level, what strategies have you seen be successful in recent years in staffing hard to fill jobs?
Thank you. Well, one of the things that I'm proud of that I led on was helping to staff our human service providers. These are folks like Youth Care and DESC and Mary's Place, right, who have seen 40, 50, 60% turnover rates in recent years. And when I came to council, they had not had a cost of living increase in 10 years. These are the folks who are charged with caring for our most vulnerable community members, whether it's elders or kiddos or folks who have behavioral or mental health needs. And if we don't invest in them, they're not available to invest in our community. So we created a cost of living increase that we put forward. It did have a lot of objection from the previous mayor, but the council was unanimous in its support. And not only did we see it go into statute, but I got a call from Mary's Place. I was talking to Marty, actually, when I was in Burien a few weeks ago, and she said, because you offered that cost of living increase, we have increased pay by, I think it was over 30%, and we've seen people stay longer. DESC told me that they were able to increase their pay by a similar amount, and they're able to staff up units that they had seen vacancies for years. That is a way for us to invest in a hard-to-reach population by actually increasing pay. Doing things like incentives and bonuses are something that I have supported in the past, but specific to Amalgamated Transit Union, who was the represented union for the bus drivers at Metro, they have endorsed me because not only have they seen someone who is going to prioritize investments in workers, but I am committed to making sure that we have more women and folks of color coming into those jobs as good living wage jobs and really making that the priority for the county. Investments in workers in childcare, transit, and public health are the 3 priorities I would love to see as immediate issues that I work on in the first year. And those are some examples. Oh, and I ride the 773 back and forth all the time in West Seattle to get from the water taxi to my house. I know the value of having those small metro vans. It is why I'm able to take the water taxi to downtown. I absolutely would love to see it. I know Lexus came over on a different boat than me. If there was a little bus to take us back and forth, we wouldn't also not be spending carbon emissions to get back and forth across the island for such a short commute. It's a really great investment in our health and the planet's health as well.
So my first career, and actually what I do now full-time when I'm not a council member, is nursing workforce development. And that's an area of the workforce that constantly we don't seem to have enough of. And so I would love to apply my knowledge in workforce development in terms of any type of job. So besides pay, so nursing is probably over 90% represented by unions. And I really appreciate the work that's done by those organizations to make sure that registered nurses at least have a living wage. But the other piece that's really important is workplace environment. What is that? Are we creating turnover? Is the county actually looking and collecting that data about what workers actually say that impact their willingness to work, and also are they staying on the job very long? If not, why not? And some of those things that we really need to tackle. The other piece too is looking in the long term in terms of our youth and encouraging them about the various careers out there. So in nursing, like many other careers, we would reach out to kids in high school, but following our STEM colleagues and knowing more about the science of emotional development, brain development in kids, we're now going into middle school, because in middle school is where kids, their ability to imagine themselves in roles where they might not have thought of is largest then. And actually, and this was a little scary, once you get to high school, their ability to imagine themselves in other roles actually declines. But that's not something that we knew until about 10 years ago. So I would be excited to use all of those tools. Do we have the right data on the workforce? Another one is workforce diversity. Because of our increasing diversity in our region, are we changing our recruitment patterns? Are we changing our outreach patterns? Does it appear that when we're doing recruitment that the diversity of our workforce isn't mirroring our community? Why is that? And does the government have a role in creating those barriers? So those are all the things I would look at in terms of increasing our workforce.
All right, I want to leave no question behind, but we've been policy wonking for 90 minutes now. Anything online?
There was one additional question, but I thought we were at the point now of the candidates asking us questions.
Is the question covering new ground? It does, actually. Well, let's bring it. Let's do it.
Okay, so we do have one more question, and it's a question for Berean Mayor Aragon. What actions have you taken since you heard of the county's offer of $1 million, no strings attached, for emergency housing to shelter those living outside in Berean?
And let's find a way, go ahead and, Teresa, think too about how you might want to talk about that.
Well, and I'm glad that's the question, because eventually I wanted to return to that, because there is a much bigger picture than people who aren't on the council would know what's happening. And so, I mean, one of the things that interesting I've been both criticized and praised to be is a very deliberative policymaker, a deliberative elected official, because I want all of the information. So interesting that someone says no strings attached. Well, they gave us parking spots. Is that land for people? No, it isn't. And one of the things that need to be considered in terms of taking the $1 million offer, first of all, when it was proposed to the council, there was nothing in writing. And I totally admire the council member who brought it up. You know, he's young, he's new to the council. I know that he wants to make a dent. But we didn't have anything in writing at the time to understand what was really entailed in the county. And also, a detail that people don't know is in order for us to take that $1 million, that we would have had to break a lease with a business owner in the city that is the major contributor to our B&O revenue. So think about that. So this is the Chamber of Commerce, right? So do we want an elected official to not talk with the community and break a lease for our largest contributor to our revenue in order to make this one proposed solution happen? The other thing is that there are at least 2 or 3 other proposals out there that haven't been aired yet because they're still in the works. As I think we have a role in the city council to educate our community to sufficient detail about what options are there, and we are working to roll them out. And so again, one of the compliments I get, sometimes it's a criticism. I don't do knee-jerk reactions. I'm not gonna take the first offer that is given to me, especially if there are other proposals available out there, and I need to talk to my community about not only which one fits. So there was a Seattle City Light property that was mentioned. Well, did people know necessarily that it is close proximity to a major high school? Well, I need that community to understand that that is proposed. And so what do they think about that? And then finally, sustainability, $1 million. As I mentioned, my parents' $30,000 home is worth $1 million today. And unfortunately, $1 million doesn't get so far. Does Burien right now have a plan for the sustainability? And then finally, the transfer of those folks to where they need to be, whether it's treatment, whether it's stable housing. Will $1 million get us there? Hadn't had a chance to make the analysis. And those are all of the things that myself and my council need to digest, to process, and share, and have that discussion with the community before we adopt a solution.
Thank you. Thank you for your encouragement to weigh in on the question as well, and I appreciate it. I think what I'm struggling to hear is the solution since that discussion, or the solution since that letter has been made public. And the discussion, as far as I've been tracking it, was discussed towards the end of last month. The letter was dated June 7th. It's now June 13th. And I think that the issue that I'm hearing from community around the region, because this again is a regional issue, is wanting to see action taken to deploy the $1 million. And again, this is from my understanding, and again, I reached out directly when I heard the word of mouth to hear what the offer was to better understand it, which we can all do. And directly what I heard was this is $1 million to be offered to support things like security and bathrooms, to ensure that there is somebody who can come around and provide case management services. We have done these within the city of Seattle, deployed not only tiny house villages and stood them up, but made sure that the residents in the neighborhood really felt like this was a value add to the community. When we think about some of the tiny house villages, including in West Seattle, that have been incredibly successful at helping to get people stably housed and get them access to the services that they've needed. The residents around the community have praised the tiny house villages for really making sure that people felt like their concerns were heard, and then during the placement of the encampment, had a place to go if they wanted to raise issues. It's been very well received at Camp Second Chance in West Seattle, and I think what we all want to hear is solutions. This is in the meantime, as DESC opens or other shelter services open, we need to have some place for people to go, because those businesses that are also concerned about the potential for folks moving in are seeing people sleep in their doorways. I hear it in the city of Seattle too. We want better places that are not in our doorways and entrances to businesses for people to be. And human service providers tell us it is easier for them to find people and get them into housing and services when they're not being moved from street to street. It's much better for the health of the individual and the health of the population, as well as the health of the local economy, when we allow for sanctioned encampments that have things like bathrooms, fences, security, and case management services.
All right, so we have Burien in the house today, apparently. Yeah, so a great object lesson in how Overtown concerns can often step on Vashon forums and Vashon concerns. So let's take a minute and just ask, have you guys ask us some questions, right? Let's turn it a little bit, and if you maybe one question each for you, for the audience, for folks online, just about what's going on Vashon and what you might want to know. It could even be like where the best trail is, where the best anything and everything. So Sofia, let's start with you, and what questions do you have for us?
I'd like to hear, is there one thing that this community really cares about that has not yet been mentioned?
So we put the ability to answer to folks on Zoom as well. If you want to put your topic in the chat there, what have we not talked about? And is there anyone who's got a couple words in the room for what we haven't talked about? Dr. Nurse.
I think the power that this community has through the voice of Vashon. One of the things that we have that's really unique in this community is the voice of Vashon. We have our own radio station. And I think that's something that the county could really kick into. And we use it for warnings, for all kinds of things. And I think that's something that's really important, that would really be an asset to the King County to get to the people of this community, so we don't feel like we're in a moat.
And you can call in. Yeah, you can call in, and then in a minute we'll just have Diane read the responses. Does that work? Awesome.
Yeah, one one thing that possibly might not have been covered is that CMAR, it's great to have them here, but if you fall down and jam your wrist on the sidewalk in front of their clinic, they send you to town. There's a more heightened level of care on the island. We formed a hospital district recently, and maybe in collaboration with the county and the hospital district, we can enhance that benefit.
All right, Diane, do we have some answers online?
Yes, related to what Jake said, Bunny Hatcher says we need 24-hour health care clinic.
Great. All right. Teresa, question for us.
I love that came up. Thank you so much. And I took notes on the 5 or 6 areas that I want to support from the hospital district: active after-hour access, in-home care, health educator connectors through IT, behavioral health services, resource capital, and alternative funding available. So those are some of the things I'd love to support in partnership to address the hospital and healthcare needs around the clock. The question that I have, and maybe the kiddo in the room has some ideas here too. I have a 3.5-year-old, and I know access to childcare is incredibly important for me to be able to keep going to work. I know that it's incredible for people to be able to stay in their job or find a new job. And the question that I have for folks is, what kind of childcare needs have you seen on the island that you'd like to make me aware of? I see the place right outside here, and I've heard from folks that there's a number of in-home childcare facilities, but that there's a real need for a larger childcare center. Is there anything that you'd like me to know, or for me to do research and the follow-up on regarding access to care 0 to 3 especially, but 0 to 5 as an economic stimulator so that more families can put roots down here and stay here?
Great. And are there, as folks think about that, is there anyone in the room who wants to just talk specifically about it? And as we're gathering online, Jessica?
With childcare on the island. I'm a single mother of 3 children, and I was working full-time. I recently met with another single mother of 3 children who is also working full-time, and I ran into a neighbor this morning who is a single mother of 3 children who is a nurse and cannot work at all right now due to the lack of childcare. All 3 of us are struggling to be able to work with the lack of childcare. It's a significant issue for many families. We don't have affordable childcare, and we don't have providers that are willing to provide it here on the island.
Diane, anything online about this? No? Okay. All right. So, oh, sure.
But I think on the opposite end of that, I do think we need, more childcare. But another thing that we need out here is respite care for adults. We lost our community care center, again, probably because of, one of the reasons because of jobs. So I think, and we used to have a woman out here who just recently passed away who ran a very effective community services for providing CNAs for people in homes. And that's another way to make things sustainable. If you can keep people and provide services in their homes, which is what my wife and I would prefer to do, many times that's a whole lot cheaper than sending somebody to a nursing home. So I think we need to look at both ends, the young kids. My kids aren't 3.5, they're 30.5. So that's important too.
Great, and I do also just want to pipe up for our arts community a little bit, because it is such a huge, vibrant piece of Vashon life and culture, and how difficult, not to circle back to affordable housing, but how we can incentivize art and incentivize paid art on the island, because we have a huge, rich tradition here in all of the arts, visual arts, performing arts, everything. And we are seeing that fall away because folks are not able to sustain themselves while making arts. So just kind of put a pitch in there for that. Anything else? Any other questions from you, from the audience before we wrap up here? Yes, Diane.
Yes, Fire Chief Matt Vinci says, the County Emergency Medical Services Levy supported a pilot program for Mobile Integrated Health, MIH. Vashon Fire and Rescue is excited to launch our MIH program later this year. We strongly encourage you to support the permanent funding of MIH in the 2025 EMS levy, which will support greater access to health care on the island.
Would you like to comment on that or questions?
I'm sort of guessing what that is, and I'll just say that what I've been looking at in Burien is, I don't know if you've heard of FD Cares in Kent, but years ago they started looking at their data of the response of our firefighters and looking at the overwhelming data. A lot of it didn't have to do with fire. It had to do with a health issue in the home. Either people fell or there were unsafe conditions, and that's what they had to respond to. So they have like a 20-year head start with a lot of jurisdictions, but since then they have nurses, they have social workers integrated in their departments so that our firefighters can focus on what they're trained to do and what they need to respond to do, which is those fires. And although on the workforce development side, I must say that I'm looking at an eye towards that as a way to build up the healthcare workforce. Now, as our population ages, just by virtue of aging, everybody, you're gonna need healthcare. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to find those opportunities to, number one, grow our healthcare workforce. We're limited at this time because the thinking is limited to hospital training. But actually I'm working in my day job and I have this eye in my Burien City Council role, are what are ways in which we can place them in communities for that vital training. So fire departments, they have that history in certain jurisdictions, but not all. But since the county does support a lot of jurisdictions in their fire service, that's a prime opportunity to grow our workforce. So that's a great example of innovations that we can build it on to the changing times. With childcare in Burien, I just want to mention that we are investing dollars in home-based childcare, which originally wasn't part of the idea, but I think that because we're coming through COVID and we've seen a lot of home-based work in industry, we wanted to support that, plus provide more access to home-based childcare. And as an employer, given my employer hat in King County, what have we learned from the pandemic in terms of flexible scheduling? How does that support families? For example, I have an employee who has a mom who is aging and needs help. And so I've been able to work with her for a schedule where she can work at home and in the office, and she's been able to fill those needs of her family simultaneously.
Thank you, and thank you very much to Chief Vinci for the question. I'm looking forward to our chat soon. I'm also really excited about the support that I've received from the firefighters for this race. So the firefighters Local 27 have endorsed me in this race last week. We made that announcement, and I think it's because I've shown investments in programs like the mobile integrated health units in the past. I was the lead person in Seattle who helped bring our Health One vans, which is firefighters plus social workers in one unit to respond to calls that otherwise police officers would usually be going to. And officers have more pressing issues. We want them to respond to actual priority one calls instead of responding to people down, somebody who is needing assistance, maybe someone who's having a behavioral health or mental health crisis or a substance abuse crisis. We want to relieve people from having to go to those from having to go to those types of calls so that they can go to priority one calls. Similarly, for our firefighters, we want them to be freed up to respond to fires and emergencies instead of going to behavioral health or mental health needs. So I see the opportunity to really strike a healthy balance with firefighter responders, the case manager responders to go collectively with social workers and to respond to people's needs. It's absolutely something I've led on. I will continue to lead on the mobile integrated health units and to support the 2025 levy along the same lines that I've done in the past. And again, I think this is all about public health. How do we make sure that we have the right responders out there responding to the right issue and freeing up our first responders to respond to priority 1 calls, and providing services that are holistic? That's exactly what the integrated units do. So thankful for their work and look forward to continuing to support that.
It hasn't come up today, and that's because we treasure it and try and really take care of it, but it's our natural environment, which is very near and dear to us. You know, we have salmon that return, we have clams, we have eagles. Our environment is very important to us, and just have that on the radar.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we are officially at time. Yeah, real quick. We have 3 minutes left of our attention, and then I don't even know what happens.
So I'm wondering, what can King County do to invest in the island in terms of incentives, for instance, to property owners, incentives to businesses and to organizations that will lift the economy, provide more jobs? Because if we don't do that, we're just going to continue to go down. 10, 20 years ago, we had more employers on this island, big employers. We had, what was it? K2. We had K2 skis and all their sports equipment, and they moved to China. We had a coffee company, Seattle's Best Coffee. They did all of their you know, they brought the coffee beans in, they did all their roasting and the packaging out of Vashon. Those companies provided hundreds of jobs. We don't have anything like that here now. And that's what we really need. We're not going to have growth without, we're not going to return to the kind of economic stability that we had in those days if we don't have jobs. And we need King County to invest in that. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to give you, let's do 2 minutes each and kind of combine this with a closing statement, right? Like how to invest in Vashon and solve worker globalization while you're at it, right? Yeah, no problem. 2 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Thanks so much for that question. I think that this is a great question to summarize on. Part of the reason I want to be on King County Council is to provide these direct investments, the infusion, the vision, the collaboration that you talked about on how we create active local economies. That is actually good for our individual and population health as well. I want to serve on I want to serve on King County Council to do exactly what you just said, make direct investments into arts and culture, small business supports, worker supports. I know that we can do that on the island by making sure that we increase the frequency of boats, the frequency of metro, working on the workforce development issues that have been raised to make sure that there is the ability to get people here and move people around, whether they're coming as tourists or workers. And I love the idea that you talked about in terms of how we can support the creation of new industries here. I'd be very interested in Green New Deal industries here so that we can create green jobs on the island and really build the economy of the future. I've had conversations recently with the Department of Commerce about how we can be reclaiming some of the production that could be occurring right here in Washington State and having ownership and the supply chains within our own state. That is something I will continue to do on King County Council in partnership with the Department of Commerce to see what additional new industries and green industries we can grow across our state, but specifically in unincorporated areas as an economic generator. And if I have just a few seconds, I'll do. Okay. I want to thank you for your time. You're here away with from your family or with your family in some cases, helping to promote a conversation around democracy and what's at risk. I hope what you've heard from me is someone who is action-oriented based on listening. I listen to what the needs of the community are. I pull together diverse tables, and I really try to act with urgency. The issues that are pressing upon us right now are far greater than anybody could ever imagined in the last, 10 or 20 years coming out of a pandemic and seeing such hardship across our region and right here on the island as well. I know we can address these issues by investing in the social determinants of health, housing, education, job supports, small business supports, arts and culture. Creating greater stability for people creates greater health equity for our region. I hope to continue to earn your support, and I know that by doing so, I have to be out here and hearing directly from you. That's my commitment to you. I'll continue to be out here, I think 1 or 2 times before Strawberry Fest, and then a few more times in the books after that. So please let me know if you'd like to have a conversation. I do want to be that liaison to King County Council and to be that direct investor and supporter of the ideas that are coming directly from the island. I treasure our conversations that we've had so far and really appreciate the advocacy that you have for our planet, small businesses, and for workers.
I've really appreciated my time with you here, and I'll just say in terms of investments to our community here is that it's really multifaceted, right? So yes, we need to do workforce development as well, and as I've mentioned, that is part of my day job, and I'm committed to that in terms of it being a major engine in the economy. But you know that people come to the Pacific Northwest because of our natural beauty. So we have to balance all those things, and having a experience with a climate action plan, preserving green space in Burien, because we know that that actually directly impacts human health. One thing that I haven't mentioned, and I've talked to other chambers of commerce, are so what are some gaps in services that they don't see in the county that could help smaller communities? One idea was an economic development department. So why doesn't the county have one where there could be more coordinated technical assistance to small businesses, and connect them to the resources that help them grow, provide them assistance where there's an emergent issue. For example, in Burien, we shifted our economic department's focus so that because we have such diverse business owners, to give them that assistance, whether it be translation or hands-on help, to be competitive for those federal funds to keep businesses afloat. And the other piece that I think Vashon would be interested in is, like Burien, we have a lot of experience of, frankly, feeling like the underdog, of someone that isn't noticed, like the squeaky wheel, because we're sitting here competing with big cities like Seattle and Bellevue. But we know that a lot of people in those major metropolitan areas call us home. And so we are just as worthy of the development, the support, and the infrastructure to support these communities as we develop over time. So I hope that you take that into consideration as you look into the race as to who to better represent you. And again, I appreciate your time and look forward to more conversations with your community members.
Thank you so much. I think we'd be happy to have both of you advocating for us. So let's just do that. I'll have 2 folks advocating for us at Casey. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. On behalf of the Vashon-Maury Community Council, on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, thank you for this sort of, we'll call this an opening discussion about the race and discover some solutions for our community. Really, really appreciate your time. Hello, folks online. Thank you so much for your time as well. And we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much.
Thank you.